In Pennsylvania, there are small towns where fear didn't come from crime. It came from something learning how to watch. Towns where people locked their doors at sunset. Streets where houses went missing from records. Places where sirens sounded without existing. And people vanished without leaving. Every story you're about to hear happened in a real small town in Pennsylvania. These are not legends. These are first-hand accounts. If you want more true horror stories based on real places and real events, subscribe to Vesper Shroud, because some towns don't let people leave unchanged. Story 1. Pennsylvania town where everyone locked their doors. I never believed in collective madness until I spent 3 weeks in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. Population 412. A place where everyone locked their doors at sunset, and nobody could tell you why. The fear started the night I arrived. I came to Millbrook as an insurance investigator, looking into a disturbing pattern of claims. 7 homeowners had filed for broken locks, reinforced doors, and security systems within the same month. Nothing unusual on paper, except that Millbrook had a crime rate of 0. Not low, 0. No burglaries in 20 years. No assaults. No vandalism. The police blotter was blank pages collecting dust. Yet everyone was terrified of something. I pulled into town just as the sun touched the western hills. The main street looked like every forgotten American town. A diner with flickering neon, a hardware store, a post office with faded flags. But something was wrong with the silence. It was too complete, too heavy, the kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums and makes you want to cough just to break it. The motel clerk, a woman named Sarah with hands that would not stop shaking, gave me a key to room 7. Her eyes kept darting to the window behind me, to the dying light outside. "You need to be inside before dark," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Lock your door. Do not open it, no matter what you hear." I laughed. "Try to." Anyway, the sound died in my throat because she was not joking. Her face was gray with genuine terror. Behind her, through a doorway, I could see her husband installing a 3rd deadbolt on their apartment door. "What happens after dark?" I asked. She just shook her head and handed me the key. Her fingers were ice cold. My room smelled like old carpet and industrial cleaner. I dropped my bag and went to the window. The sun was maybe 20 minutes from setting. I watched the street below. One by one, people hurried to their homes. A man sprinted from his truck to his front door like something was chasing him. A woman grabbed her child and practically threw the girl inside before slamming the door. I heard the sound of locks clicking, heavy bolts sliding into place, chains rattling. By the time the sun disappeared, the town was sealed tight. I sat on my bed and waited. For what? I did not know. An hour passed. Nothing happened. Just silence. Deep, suffocating silence that made my ears ring. I tried to laugh at myself for getting spooked by a bunch of paranoid small-town folks. But the laugh caught in my chest when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Moving down the hallway outside my room. The floorboards creaked under heavy weight. The steps stopped right outside my door. I stared at the handle, waiting for it to turn. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my teeth. The footsteps moved on. Down the hall, down the stairs, out into the night. I went to the window and looked out. The street was empty. Completely empty. No cars, no people. Just pools of yellow light from the street lamps and shadows that seemed darker than they should be. Thicker, almost alive. Then I saw it. A figure standing under the street lamp across from the motel. Tall. Too tall. Its proportions were wrong. Arms too long. Head tilted at an angle that made my stomach turn. It was not moving. Just standing there, watching my window. I stepped back. My hands found the curtains and jerked them closed. I locked my door. Both locks. And I sat on the bed in the dark, listening to my own breathing, until exhaustion pulled me under. The next morning, everything seemed normal. Bright sunshine. People walking around. The diner was open. I went in and ordered coffee and eggs. The place was half full, but nobody was talking. Just the scrape of forks on plates and the hiss of the grill. I tried making conversation with the waitress. She smiled politely and said nothing useful. I spent the day interviewing homeowners. Every conversation was the same. They would talk about the weather, about crops, about nothing important. But when I asked about the locks, about the fear, their faces would close up like steel doors. One man, a farmer named Tom, finally cracked after I pushed too hard. "You feel it, do not you?" he said. His eyes were bloodshot, that feeling like something is standing right behind you. Like if you turn around too fast, you will see it. "Whatever it is, what is it?" I asked. "I do not know. Nobody knows. It just started happening about 3 months ago. First it was just a feeling. Then people started seeing things. Shadows that moved wrong, shapes in windows, footsteps when nobody was there. And the worst part, he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. The police logs. Go look at them. Dozens of emergency calls. People screaming for help. But when the cops arrive, there is nothing. No evidence. No intruders. Just terrified people who swear something was in their house. I went to the police station that afternoon. Chief Dalton was a heavy man with tired eyes who looked like he had not slept in weeks. He showed me the logs without me even asking. Like he wanted someone else to see, to confirm he was not losing his mind. The entries were chilling. Call after call, starting 3 months ago. Reports of break-ins with no signs of forced entry. Sounds of breathing inside locked rooms. Shadows moving across walls. Scratching sounds from attics and basements. And the repeated phrase in almost every report. Someone was watching me. Have you found anything? I asked. Dalton shook his head. Nothing. No fingerprints. No footprints. No evidence anyone was ever there. But I believe them. Every single one of them. Because I have felt it too. Felt what? The watching. Something out there is paying attention to this town. And it is getting bolder. That night, I made sure to lock my door early. The sun was still an hour from setting when I heard Sarah knocking. She looked even worse than before. Her hair was unwashed. Her clothes rumpled. You should leave, she said. Tonight. Right now. Before it gets dark. Before what gets dark? What is out there? She looked over her shoulder, down the empty hallway. I do not know what it is. But it is learning. Every night it gets closer. Every night it figures out a little more about us. About how we live. How we think. Last week, something tried my door handle. Slowly. Like it was testing to see if I would hear it. Like it was experimenting. Did you call the police? What can they do? You cannot arrest a shadow. You cannot fight something that is not there when you look directly at it. She left me alone with that horrifying thought. I tried to stay awake that night. I really did. But exhaustion got me around midnight. I woke to the sound of scratching. Soft, persistent, coming from my door. Not the outside of the door. The inside, like something was already in the room with me, trying to get out. I did not move. Did not breathe. Just lay there in the dark, listening to that terrible scratching sound. It went on for maybe 5 minutes, then stopped. The silence that followed was worse. In that silence, I heard breathing. Slow, steady, right next to my bed. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but some animal instinct told me to stay perfectly still, to pretend I was asleep. Whatever was in my room, it was waiting for me to acknowledge it, to confirm I could see it. I kept my eyes closed until the sun came up. When I finally looked, the room was empty, but there were scratches on the inside of my door, deep gouges in the wood, and on the floor next to my bed, there were marks. Not footprints, just impressions in the carpet where something heavy had stood. I should have left then. Should have gotten in my car and driven until Millbrook was just a bad memory. But I am stubborn. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was happening. I spent that day in the town library. It was a small building, musty and forgotten. The librarian, an ancient woman named Mrs. Chen, watched me with knowing eyes as I searched through old newspapers and records. I found something, a pattern. Every 70 years, Millbrook experienced a period of mass hysteria. Accounts from the 1850s described a fear that gripped the town. People barricaded their homes, refused to go out after dark. Then, after about 6 months, it stopped. Same thing in the 1920s. Same thing in the 1990s. The fear would arrive, build to a crescendo, then vanish like it had never been. But there was a difference this time. In the past, nobody ever saw anything. It was just fear, just paranoia. This time, people were seeing things. The phenomenon was manifesting, becoming real. Mrs. Chen watched me piece it together. Finally, she spoke. It feeds on attention, she said. The more we fear it, the more we think about it, the stronger it becomes, the more real it gets. In the past, people eventually stopped believing, stopped looking, and it faded away. But now, with everyone installing cameras, watching their doors, staying alert all night, we are feeding it, making it solid. What is it? I asked for the 100th time. A thought that learned to think back, she said. A fear that became aware of itself. And now it is learning how to touch us. I left the library as the sun began its descent. I had maybe an hour before dark. I went back to my room, packed my bag. I was done. I had my answer, disturbing as it was. I was leaving, but Sarah was waiting in the parking lot. She grabbed my arm with surprising strength. You cannot drive after dark, she said. You will not make it. It knows the roads now. 3 people tried to leave last week. They all came back. They would not talk about what they saw out there in the darkness between towns. But they have not spoken since. They just sit in their houses, staring at nothing. I looked at the setting sun, at the shadows growing longer, at the way the light seemed to be dying faster than it should. I went back to my room, locked the door, both locks, and I waited. The scratching started earlier that night. Not at my door, at the window. Something was testing the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Deliberate, patient. I closed the curtains, but I could still hear it. The tapping moved around the building, window to window, like it was mapping the structure, learning it. Then the knocking started. Every door in the motel. Knock, knock, knock. The same rhythm, the same force. I heard Sarah screaming from the office, heard her husband yelling, heard locks clicking and chains rattling as people desperately secured their doors. The knocking stopped. The silence returned. In that silence, I heard something worse. Whispering. Dozens of voices, just outside my door, having a conversation I could not quite make out. The voices sounded wrong, like they were learning how to form words. Practicing. One voice separated from the others. It spoke clearly. It said my name. My blood turned to ice. It knew who I was. "We see you," the voice said. Not a threat, just a statement of fact. An acknowledgement. I did not sleep that night. I sat with my back against the wall, watching the door, listening to those voices whisper and learn and practice being human. When the sun finally rose, the voices stopped. I heard people emerging from their rooms, heard cars starting, heard life resuming, but everyone moved a little slower, looked a little more broken. I tried to leave again. This time I made it to my car, got the engine started, but when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw it, standing in the motel window, in my room, looking out. It had my height, my build. It was wearing my face. It smiled at me, my smile, but wrong, too wide, too knowing. I drive back to the motel, parked, went inside, because I finally understood. It was not about leaving. It was about understanding that we had created something, fed it with our fear, given it shape with our attention. And now it was learning to be us. That was 6 days ago. I am still in Millbrook. I lock my door at sunset like everyone else. I hear the scratching and the whispers and the footsteps. And every night, the sounds get a little more human, a little more real. Yesterday, I saw Mrs. Chen walking down the street after dark. Except Mrs. Chen died 3 days ago. Heart attack. But there she was, walking, smiling, learning how to move in her skin. The thing we created is replacing us, one by one, learning how to be human by wearing us like masks. And the terrifying part? I cannot tell anymore which people in this town are still real, which are still us. The copies are perfect. They lock their doors like we do. They fear like we do. They are us. I do not know if I am still me. I think I am. But every morning when I look in the mirror, I have to check. Have to make sure my smile is not too wide. That my eyes are not watching myself with too much interest. The police logs are still filling up with calls. But now the voices on the phone sound off. Like they are reading from a script. Learning their lines. Millbrook is still here. Population 412. A town where everyone locks their doors at sunset. Where everyone knows something is watching. Where everyone is slowly being replaced by the fear they created. And if you are listening to this, if you are thinking about Millbrook, picturing it in your mind, feeling that creeping dread, then congratulations. You are feeding it too. You are helping it learn, helping it spread. Because fear is contagious, and attention is food. And somewhere, in some town you have never heard of, doors are starting to lock at sunset. And people are starting to feel watched. It is learning how to find new homes, new minds to inhabit, new fears to feed on. Sweet dreams. Story 2. Last night shift in a Pennsylvania mill town. I heard the machinery at 3 in the morning, and I knew something was terribly, impossibly wrong. Let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you the story that no one in Millbrook wants to remember. The chilling account of what I witnessed during those final nights in the autumn of 2019. This is a true nightmare, a disturbing sequence of events that destroyed my life and cost 3 good men their lives. I am the only one left to tell it, the only survivor who knows what really happened inside that haunted factory. My name does not matter anymore. What matters is that you understand what I experienced in that eerie, darkness-filled mill town, buried in the hills of Pennsylvania where the rust never sleeps and the shadows grow longer each year. I took the job on a Tuesday. The economy had been creeping across my life like a slow poison, and I needed work. Any work. When old Mickey from the unemployment office called about a night security position at the Brennan Steel Mill, I did not hesitate. The mill had been closed for 7 years. They wanted someone to watch the property, monitor the empty buildings, make sure no one broke in to steal copper wiring or leftover equipment. 8 hours a night, 5 nights a week, decent pay. I had done security work before. This would be easy. I was so wrong. The first 3 nights were uneventful, just unsettling in the way abandoned industrial spaces are unsettling. The Brennan Mill spread across 20 acres of cracked pavement and deteriorating brick. 7 massive structures dominated the landscape, each one a relic of when steel flowed and furnaces roared and 3,000 people worked beneath those rusting metal roofs. Now the buildings stood like tombs, silent and terrifying in their emptiness. My job was simple. I drove through the property every hour, checked the perimeter, made sure all gates were locked. I watched the security monitors from the small office they maintained near the main entrance, the only building still powered by electricity. On those first nights, I saw nothing but darkness and the occasional rat crossing a factory floor. The monitors showed empty spaces, hallways that seemed to stretch forever, rooms where machinery once vibrated the ground itself. The security system was ancient, installed in the late 1980s when the mill still operated. Black and white cameras, some of them barely functional, covered the major buildings. I could see the cavernous factory floor through one camera, the administrative hallway through another. Most screens showed nothing but shadows and the slow, creeping darkness of a closed facility. On the 4th night, everything changed. I was sitting in the office at 2:47 in the morning when I heard it. The sound was faint at first, a low grinding noise that seemed to come from somewhere far away. I turned up the volume on the small radio I had brought, thinking that was the source. But the sound continued, louder now, distinct and separate from any electronic equipment. It was the sound of machinery, heavy, industrial machinery, the kind of sound I had only heard in recordings and YouTube videos about old factories. I stood up from my chair, my heart already accelerating. The security monitors showed nothing. Every building appeared empty and dormant. I walked to the window of the office and looked out at the silent complex of structures looming against the starless sky. The sound grew louder, more terrifying with each passing second. It was the sound of a furnace, or a printing press, or a massive hydraulic system. It was impossible. The electricity to those buildings had been cut off years ago. I did what any frightened, disturbed security guard would do. I grabbed my flashlight and my phone and walked toward the sound. The grinding noise seemed to come from Building 3, the largest structure, the old primary factory floor where the heaviest machinery once operated. My footsteps echoed on the cracked pavement. The night was cold and unnaturally quiet except for that eerie, chilling mechanical sound. As I approached the building, the noise stopped abruptly. The silence was worse than the sound. It was the silence of something aware of my presence, something that knew I was coming and had ceased its terrifying activity specifically because I was getting closer. I stood outside the main entrance, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the cracked glass doors and the chains wrapped around the handles. The doors were sealed. No one had entered this building in years. I listened for several minutes. Nothing, just the wind pushing through the eaves and the distant howl of coyotes in the hills beyond the mill. I went back to the office, my hands shaking, and sat down. I told myself I had imagined it. I told myself the wind could make strange sounds in old buildings, that maybe something had broken loose inside and was hanging, creating a noise that seemed like machinery. But I knew I was lying to myself. I had heard machinery, real, active, impossible machinery. The next night, I heard it again at a different time, around 4:15 in the morning. This time it came from Building 5. I did not go outside. I sat in the office and listened to that haunting, terrifying sound echo across the mill complex. It lasted for exactly 8 minutes, then stopped with the same sudden absence I had experienced the previous night. I called the office that manages the property. I spoke to a woman named Patricia who seemed surprised to hear from me. I asked her about electrical systems, about whether any buildings were still on generators, about whether it was possible that some machinery was still active. She assured me it was not possible. Everything had been shut down. The boilers had been drained. The transformers had been removed. Then she asked me why I was asking. I did not tell her. I made an excuse about strange noises and hung up. On the 6th night, I brought a laptop and started reviewing the security footage. I had access to the system, though the footage was only kept for 48 hours before being overwritten. I went back and watched the videos from the previous 2 nights, searching for any sign of movement, any indication of what could be causing those disturbing, mechanical sounds. What I found made my blood cold. On the footage from night 4, during the exact time I heard the machinery from building 3, the camera aimed at that building showed a shape moving across the factory floor. It was humanoid, but not quite right. The movement was jerky, unnatural, like stop-motion animation. The figure moved from the back of the factory toward the furnace area, then disappeared from frame. The camera caught nothing else. No explanation. Just that creepy, nightmarish figure moving with horrifying, impossible grace. I checked the camera for building 5. Same thing. The night I heard machinery, a shape appeared on screen. Different angle, different building, but identical in its wrongness. The way it moved, the way it seemed to know where the cameras were, the way it kept itself mostly just out of frame. I felt real fear then. Not the nervous fear of someone hearing strange noises, but genuine, terrifying dread. The kind of fear that makes your body feel like it is slowly filling with ice water. I did not go back to the office that night. I sat in my truck, parked near the main gate, with the doors locked and the engine running. I stayed there until dawn, when the sun finally broke over the Pennsylvania hills and the darkness retreated enough for me to feel safe. The next morning, I called the main office again. I asked Patricia about the other night security guards. There had been 3 of them before me. What happened to them? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Patricia told me about Marcus, who had worked there the previous year. Marcus quit after 1 month. He said he heard things. He said he saw things on the security cameras. Then there was David, who lasted less than a week. David reported machinery sounds and movement in the buildings. When he went to investigate, he found one of the security cameras had been deliberately turned to face the wall. After that, he simply did not show up for his shift. The 3rd guard was Raymond. Patricia said Raymond had worked a night shift for 3 months. He was a quiet man, reliable, never complained. Then one morning, the office received a call from the police. Raymond had been found dead at his home. Heart attack, the coroner said. Massive cardiac event. He was only 52 years old. I felt the fear take hold of me completely. This was no longer just creepy. This was dangerous. This was a horror scenario that had already claimed a man's life. That night, I considered not showing up. But I told myself that would be running, and I was not the kind of man who ran. Besides, what could I do? Quit and go back to unemployment? I needed this job. I needed the money. So I returned to the mill complex as darkness fell over the landscape. The security office suddenly felt very small and very exposed. The windows were large enough that anything outside could look in, could watch me watching the monitors. I thought about closing the blinds, but that felt like surrender, like acknowledging that something was out there and I was afraid of it. At 3:12 in the morning, the machinery began again. This time it was coming from Building 7, the last structure in the complex, the one furthest from the office. The grinding, whirring, horrifying sound of industrial equipment that should not exist in a place with no electricity, no power, no active systems. But I knew it was real. The sound was too vivid, too specific, too absolutely terrifying to be imaginary. And then I saw it on the monitors. Every camera in the complex suddenly showed the same thing. Shapes, multiple shapes. They moved through the buildings like nothing I had ever seen. Their movements jerky and uncoordinated, yet somehow perfectly synchronized. They moved toward Building 7 as if drawn by the machinery sound. Or as if they were the source of it. I counted 7 distinct shapes on 7 different cameras, one in each building, all converging toward the largest structure. The shapes were definitely humanoid, but something about their proportions was wrong. Their limbs seemed too long. Their heads seemed to tilt at angles that should have been impossible. The machinery sound grew louder, more frantic, more desperate. I realized with a horrifying clarity that I was watching something beyond my understanding. I was witnessing something that should not exist, something that violated every law of physics and reason I understood. I grabbed my keys and ran for my truck. I did not stop at the gate. I drove through it, the chain breaking with a sound that barely registered in my adrenaline-addled mind. I drove faster than I should have on those rural Pennsylvania roads, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my eyes constantly checking the mirror to see if anything was following me. Nothing followed me. But as I drove away from the mill complex, I saw something that froze every part of my mind. The sky above the mill was glowing, a faint, pulsating red glow that seemed to emanate from inside Building 7. The machinery sound had stopped, replaced by a low, subsonic hum that I could feel in my chest even at a distance of 2 miles. I drove all night. I did not go home. I drove to another county, checked into a cheap motel, and sat on the bed until the sun came up. I tried to convince myself it had been a nightmare, a stress-induced hallucination, anything but reality. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what was happening in that eerie, darkness-soaked mill complex. Something impossible was occurring there. Something old. Something that had been waiting in those abandoned buildings for years, waiting for the darkness to be complete, waiting for the machinery to be silent, waiting for the right moment to emerge from whatever dimensional space or nightmare realm it had been occupying. I never went back to the Brennan mill. I did not return my work equipment. I did not explain my abandonment to the office. I simply disappeared, moving to a different state, finding different work, trying to construct a new life far away from Pennsylvania and that disturbing, chilling place. But I followed the news from Millbrook. I know what happened. 2 weeks after I fled, the second shift security guard, a man named Robert, reported to work at the mill. He was a different company, a different security firm that took over the contract after I abandoned it. Robert lasted one night. He called the police at 4 a.m, screaming about the machinery, about the shapes, about the impossible things he was witnessing on the security cameras. The police arrived at the mill to find Robert sitting in his truck with a loaded gun in his mouth. He pulled the trigger before they could stop him. The third and final security guard, a man named Thomas, was hired by the property management company despite the incidents. Thomas was desperate for work, like I had been. Thomas made it through 2 nights before he walked into Building 7. They found his body the next morning inside the furnace. His remains were burned, though the furnace had no power, no fuel, no explanation for how he could have been burned. The coroner ruled it an accident, but there are no accidents of that nature. 3 men dead, 3 security guards who heard the machinery and saw the shapes in the darkness. Now, 5 years later, the mill complex still stands. The property remains unmaintained, crumbling further each year. The buildings are sealed now. No one works there. The town of Millbrook has grown quieter, as if the mill is pulling life energy from the area, leaving everything stagnant and haunted. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if those shapes are still there. I wonder if they are still operating that impossible machinery, still moving through the darkness with their unsettling, jerky grace. I wonder if they are waiting, trapped in that place between worlds, or if they are slowly expanding their presence into our reality. I wonder if my dreams of machinery and shadows and shapes that move wrong are just memories of that terrifying week, or if they are something more. If they are something reaching out from that mill complex, trying to pull me back. I have not been able to work night shifts since. I cannot be awake during darkness anymore. The sound of machinery, any machinery, sends me into a state of absolute panic. And sometimes, when the wind blows through the old industrial areas, I swear I can hear it. That grinding, that whirring, that impossible sound of a mill that should be silent forever. The Brennan mill still stands in Pennsylvania, waiting in the darkness. And somewhere in those eerie, shadow-filled buildings, something is still moving. Something is still here, something that should not exist in our world. If these Pennsylvania small-town stories feel deeply wrong, make sure you're subscribed to Vesper Shroud. We document true horror stories tied to real American towns. And what's coming next only gets darker. Story 3. Town that vanishes. What if I told you that somewhere in Pennsylvania, hidden between the highways and the forests, there is a town that does not exist? A place where the roads lead you in, but finding your way out becomes impossible. I know this because I went there, and what I found in that chilling, eerie place changed everything I thought I knew about reality. My name is David. I am a truck driver. I have been driving the same roads across Pennsylvania for 17 years. I know every highway, every rest stop, every creepy corner of these back roads. But 3 months ago, something happened that shattered the safety of that routine. Something that still haunts me every single night. It was a Tuesday evening in September, the kind of night where the sky turns gray and the trees seem to lean in closer than they should. I was heading west on Route 220, about 40 miles outside of Altoona, when my GPS began to malfunction. This was unusual. My navigation system had never failed me before. The screen flickered. The signal bars disappeared. Within seconds, I had no maps, no directions, nothing but the horrifying realization that I was completely alone on a dark highway with no way to navigate. I should have pulled over. I should have waited for the signal to return. But I did not. Instead, I kept driving. Then I saw the road sign. This is where everything becomes terrifying. It was a standard green highway sign, the kind you see thousands of times on American roads. But this sign was different. The letters on it were worn and faded, as if they had been exposed to decades of rain and wind. The town name was barely legible. Millbrook, that was all it said. No population number, no exit distance, just the name, written in letters that seemed to fade away even as I stared at them. I had never heard of Millbrook. I had driven this route hundreds of times. I knew every town, every junction, every possible exit in this region. Millbrook did not exist in my memory. It did not exist on my GPS. And yet, there was the sign. My curiosity overpowered my caution. The road curved sharply to the right, and I followed it. The turn seemed to take me away from the main highway, down a narrower road lined with dense forest. The trees were thick and dark, and the canopy overhead blocked out what little light remained from the fading day. My headlights cut through the darkness like knives, but they only seemed to make the shadows deeper. After about 3 miles of driving through this unsettling, creepy woodland, the forest opened up. And that is when I saw Millbrook. It was a town, a real, solid, physical town. There were houses on both sides of the road, neat and well-maintained. There were streetlights, some of them still glowing with an orange light in the gathering darkness. There were storefronts, their windows dark but their facades intact. There was even a town square with a gazebo in the center. Everything looked frozen in time. Everything looked like a nightmare made solid. But there was no one. No cars drove through the streets. No lights shone from inside any building. No people walked on the sidewalks. The town was completely, utterly empty. The silence was absolute. It pressed against my eardrums like a physical force. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. This was a place of profound, disturbing emptiness, and my fear began to rise. I drove slowly down the main street, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I kept my eyes moving, searching for any sign of life, any indication that someone, anyone, was watching me. The shops had names painted on their windows. I could read them as I passed. Murphy, his diner, Millbrook Hardware, the dress shop, a movie theater called the Starlight. All of these places looked like they had been opened yesterday. There were no boarded windows, no signs of decay. But they were all closed, all empty, all waiting for customers who would never return. I passed a school, a brick building with a flagpole in front, the flag hanging motionless against the pale sky. The parking lot was empty. The playground equipment stood silent and unused. I imagined children running through that yard, their laughter echoing through the streets. But I could not imagine it. Not in this place. Nothing could live here. Nothing could create joy in a town as haunted and terrifying as Millbrook. My phone. I thought about my phone. I pulled it out from my pocket and looked at the screen. No signal. Not a single bar. Worse than that, the time had stopped. The clock showed 6:47 p.m., the same time it had shown when I turned onto the road leading to this eerie, chilling place. My phone was caught in a moment. Time itself seemed to be broken in Millbrook. I turned a corner and came upon a row of houses. They were traditional American homes, the kind you see throughout the suburbs of Pennsylvania. 2 stories, white walls, dark shutters, small front porches. Each house had a driveway, and in one driveway, I saw a car. A sedan, powder blue, the kind that had been manufactured in the 1960s. It was perfectly clean. There was no rust, no dust, no indication that it had been sitting there for decades. Yet something about it told me that it had been parked there for an impossibly long time. The horrifying truth began to settle in my mind. Millbrook was not an abandoned town. Millbrook was a frozen town, a place where time had stopped. I did not want to explore further. Everything inside me screamed at me to drive faster, to find the exit, to escape this creepy, eerie nightmare. But I could not. I was drawn forward, pulled by a force I could not name or understand. I drove deeper into the town. The houses began to change. The farther I drove, the older the homes became. Victorian mansions with gables and turrets started to appear, their paint peeling away from the wood beneath. The streets became narrower. The lampposts grew more ornate, more antique. It was as if I was driving backward through time, deeper into the past with every turn of the wheel. I began to realize that I was at the heart of Millbrook now, in its oldest section, in the place where it had all begun. I saw it then, a church, white wood with a steeple that pointed upward into the darkening sky like an accusing finger. The doors were open, just slightly open, just enough that I could see inside. And inside, I could see darkness. But not the darkness of an empty room. A different kind of darkness. The kind that seems to move. The kind that has a presence. I stopped the truck. My hands were shaking. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. The engine rumbled beneath me. The only sound in all of Millbrook. I knew I should drive past the church. I knew I should keep moving. But instead, I found myself reaching for the door handle. Some part of me needed to know. Some part of me needed to understand what had happened to this town. I stepped down from the truck cab. The air was cold, but not the kind of cold that comes from autumn. This was a different cold. A cold that seemed to come from nowhere, from everywhere. A cold that had no source and no end. My breath misted in front of my face. The streets around me were silent. So silent that I could hear my own heartbeat. So silent that the silence itself became a sound. A terrifying, suffocating presence that wrapped around me like a shroud. I walked toward the church. My feet moved against my will. Every step took me closer to that darkness in the doorway. Every step felt like a terrible mistake. But I could not stop. Something was pulling me forward. Something was calling me into Millbrook, this darkest secret. I stood at the threshold. I looked inside, and I saw them. People. Dozens of them. Hundreds of them. They stood in the pews, and they sat in the chairs, and they knelt on the floor. They were frozen. Their faces were turned upward toward the altar, their eyes wide and staring, their mouths open as if caught in the middle of a scream that never came. They wore clothes from different eras. Some wore the fashions of the 1960s. Some wore clothes that looked like they belonged in the 1920s. Some wore dresses and suits that seemed to come from the Victorian era. And they were all perfectly preserved. Not dead, not decayed, preserved. As if time itself had stopped while they stood in this place. As if they had been caught in a moment of terrible, unspeakable horror and held there forever. That was when I felt the presence behind me. A cold sensation, like invisible fingers running down the back of my neck. I turned around, and I saw the street had changed. The houses were even older now. The lampposts had turned to gas lamps. The asphalt of the street had become dirt. And the town around me was shifting, transforming into something that belonged to centuries past. Behind me, the church began to fade. Its white paint turned gray and then black. The steeple collapsed inward like it was made of smoke. I ran back to my truck, my legs pumping, my lungs burning with the effort. I did not look back. I did not think. I only moved. My fingers found the door handle. I pulled myself into the cab. I slammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I pressed the accelerator down as hard as I could. The truck surged forward. The streets of Millbrook blurred around me. The houses seemed to stretch and twist. The lampposts grew taller and thinner. The sky above turned not dark but colorless, as if all of existence was being drained of meaning. I drove, and I drove, and I drove, and then, suddenly, I was back on Route 220. The highway stretched out before me in the darkness. The forest lined the road on both sides. The GPS on my dashboard came back to life. The time on my phone jumped ahead 20 minutes. My hands were still shaking as I pulled over onto the shoulder and tried to breathe. I sat there for an hour. I sat in my truck, with all the doors locked, and I tried to understand what had happened. The town was real. I had seen it. I had driven through it. But when I looked at my phone and tried to search for it online, there was nothing. No Millbrook, Pennsylvania. No records of a town with that name. No maps showed it. No websites mentioned it. It was as if the town did not exist in the world outside of that moment. But it did exist. I know it did, because I still have the sign. When I finally drove back toward that turn, I found the highway sign lying on its side in the tall grass beside the road. I did not mean to take it. But I did. I stopped, and I picked it up, and I threw it in the back of my truck. The sign is in my garage now. It is real. It is solid. The faded letters still spell out the word Millbrook. Sometimes, late at night, I go out there and stand in front of it. I touch the metal. I feel how cold it is, colder than it should be. And I think about the people in the church. I think about their faces. I think about their mouths open in that eternal, silent scream. I have tried to go back. I have driven Route 227 times since that night. But I can never find the turn. The road that led to Millbrook is gone. There is no exit. There is no sign. There is only the highway and the forest and the darkness. But sometimes, when I am driving through Pennsylvania at night, when the roads are empty and the sky is black and the trees press in close on both sides, I feel it. I feel the pull. I feel Millbrook calling to me. It is still out there. I know it is. Somewhere beyond the maps, somewhere outside of the world that most people see, that town still stands. And those people are still there, standing in that church, frozen in their moment of unspeakable terror, waiting for someone else to find them, waiting for someone else to step through those open doors, waiting for someone else to join them in that place where time has stopped and silence is eternal. Sometimes I wonder if they even know I was there. Sometimes I wonder if they felt me watching them. Sometimes I wonder what will happen the next time I drive toward that turn. And sometimes, in the moments just before I fall asleep, I hear something. A sound like wind, a sound like breathing, a sound like the opening of a church door. And I know that Millbrook is still calling. It is always calling. And one day, I fear I will be drawn back there again. But this time, I may not have the strength to drive away. Story 4. House on Kirkwood Street. I found the listing on a Tuesday afternoon while scrolling through foreclosure auctions during my lunch break. A 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet Pennsylvania borough, selling for $32,000. The photograph showed hardwood floors, crown molding, a wraparound porch. Nothing about it screamed danger or horror or run, just an old house that needed someone to care about it again. The real estate agent met me outside on a gray October morning. She was younger than me, maybe late 20s, and she would not look at the house directly while we stood on the sidewalk. She kept her eyes on her phone, on the street, on anything except the building behind her. Full disclosure, she said, pulling out a folder, this property has had 6 owners in the last 10 years. I laughed. At 43 years old, I had been through enough renovations to know that some houses just attracted bad luck. Plumbing issues, foundation problems, the usual nightmares that made people panic and sell. I told her I was not scared of a little work. She did not laugh back. The county records list unlivable conditions for each departure. She continued, flipping through pages she clearly did not want to read. But nobody ever specifies what those conditions were. No mold reports, no structural damage citations, nothing in the inspection records. The way she said it made my skin prickle, but I pushed the feeling down. I needed this. After the divorce, after losing the contracting business, after watching my savings account drain to nothing, I needed something I could fix and flip. Something I could control. This house was that opportunity. The door stuck when she turned the key, like the frame had swollen, and the smell that hit us was not the musty odor of an empty house. It was cold, sterile, like a hospital room that had been scrubbed too many times. The afternoon light coming through the windows seemed dimmer inside, as if the walls absorbed it somehow. We walked through the first floor and everything looked normal. Dated kitchen, living room with a fireplace, dining room with water stains on the ceiling. Standard old house problems, but the temperature kept dropping as we moved deeper inside. By the time we reached the back hallway, I could see my breath. Heating system probably needs work, I said, mostly to convince myself. The agent did not respond. She was staring at the basement door at the end of the hall. It was open, just a crack, and I had this overwhelming certainty that neither of us had opened it. I stepped forward and pulled it wide. Wooden stairs descended into darkness so complete it looked solid, like I could reach out and touch it. I found a light switch and flipped it, but nothing happened. The bulb must have been dead. I will check it out later, I said, closing the door firmly. It clicked shut with a sound that seemed too loud, too final. We finished the walkthrough in silence. I signed the papers that afternoon. Moving in took 3 days. I brought everything I owned, which was not much anymore. A bed, some boxes of clothes, tools for the renovation work. The house felt bigger, empty, and colder. I set up a space heater in the bedroom and told myself I would fix the heating system first thing. That first night, I woke up at 3:17 in the morning because I heard footsteps on the stairs. Not creaky floorboard sounds or settling house noises. Actual footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming up from the first floor. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. I waited there in the dark, barely breathing, for what felt like hours. Eventually, I convinced myself I had been dreaming. Old houses make sounds. Everyone knows that. I was just on edge, sleeping in an unfamiliar place. But I did not sleep again that night. The next morning, I found the basement door open again. Wide open this time, not just cracked. The darkness down there seemed even thicker in daylight, if that was possible. I went to my truck and got a heavy-duty flashlight, the kind contractors use in crawl spaces. I was going to face this like an adult, like someone who solves problems instead of running from them. I made it down 4 steps before the smell hit me. Not decay or mildew or any normal basement smell. This was wrong on a level one could not name. Sweet and chemical and organic all at once, like something alive and rotting at the same time. The flashlight beam could not penetrate more than a few feet into that darkness. It just stopped, absorbed by something my eyes could not process. Something moved down there. Not a rat or a raccoon. Something large enough to displace air, to make the darkness shift and flow like water. I backed up those stairs faster than I have ever moved in my life, and I slammed that door so hard the frame cracked. I spent the rest of the day researching the house online. Property records, news archives, anything I could find about Kirkwood Street in the borough. What I discovered made the chemical smell in the basement seem like a mercy. The house was built in 1873 by a doctor named Albert Marsh. He ran a private practice from the building, treating patients in the front rooms while his family lived upstairs. The local historical society had one photograph of him, a stern man with dark eyes that seemed to follow you across the screen. Below the photo was a single line of text that made my hands shake. Practice closed following the disappearance of patients, 1876. Not death, not malpractice, disappearance. I kept digging. Between 1876 and 1880, 14 people went missing in that borough. All of them had been patients of Dr. Marsh. The investigation report was sealed, but newspaper articles from the time used words like unspeakable and horrors beyond Christian comprehension. Albert Marsh hanged himself in the basement in 1880. His family left that same night and never returned. The house sat empty for 40 years before someone bought it and tried to make it a home again. I should have left then. I should have walked out that door and never looked back. Losing money be damned. But I kept thinking about the divorce papers, about my ex-wife, this lawyer explaining how I would be paying off debt for the next decade, about the way my daughter looked at me now like I was a failure. This house was supposed to save me. This was supposed to be my second chance. So I stayed. The footsteps came every night at 3:17. Always the same pattern, always stopping outside my door. On the 4th night, I opened the door while they were happening. The hallway was empty, but I could hear breathing. Slow, wet, labored breathing that came from everywhere and nowhere. The basement door was always open in the morning. Always. On the 6th day, I forced myself to go down there. I brought every light I owned, set them up on the stairs, and descended with a hammer in one hand and my phone in the other. If something was living down there, animal or vagrant or whatever, I was going to deal with it. The basement was smaller than it should have been. The house above was probably 40 feet deep, but the basement only extended maybe 20 feet. That meant there was space behind the far wall, a gap between the foundation and the dirt. I could see where the original stone foundation ended and someone had built a newer brick wall in front of it. That brick wall was weeping. Not water damage or condensation. It was weeping thick, dark liquid that looked almost black in the light. The liquid pooled on the floor in patterns that were not random. Shapes, symbols, things that hurt to look at directly. I heard the breathing again, but now I could tell it was coming from behind that brick wall. From whatever space had been sealed off back there, something was behind that wall, and it was aware of me. I could feel its attention like heat on my skin. My phone rang and I nearly dropped it. My daughter. I answered because I always answer when she calls, even when my hands are shaking so badly I can barely hold the phone. Dad, she said, are you okay? I had this really disturbing dream about you. I told her I was fine. I told her the house was coming along great. I told her all the lies a father tells when he does not want his child to know how terrifying his life has become. We talked for maybe 5 minutes, and the whole time I could feel that presence behind the wall, listening to every word. After we hung up, I ran up those stairs and I did not stop running until I was in my truck with the engine on. But I did not drive away. I sat there in the driveway as the sun set, watching the house grow dark, watching lights I had not turned on appear in windows, watching shadows move behind glass. I went to the county records office the next morning. I needed to know what was behind that wall, needed to understand what 6 families before me had discovered. The clerk was an older woman who recognized the address as soon as I said it. You bought the Marsh house, she said, and it was not a question. You are number 7. She pulled out a file so old the pages were yellow and brittle. Inside were incident reports from every family that had lived there. None of them had stayed longer than 2 months. All of them described the same things. Footsteps, open doors, the basement, and all of them mentioned the wall. One report, from 2014, included a paragraph that made my blood run cold. The family had hired contractors to demolish the brick wall and see what was behind it. The contractors refused to finish the job. They're, quote, included in the report, whatever is back there should stay back there. We could hear it moving in the dark. We could hear it breathing. It knew our names. I drove back to the house because I had nowhere else to go. My savings were gone. I had no family left except my daughter. And I could not let her see me like this, defeated and terrified. So I went back to the house on Kirkwood Street, back to the breathing darkness, back to whatever waited behind that wall. That night, the footsteps did not stop outside my door. They came inside. I felt the weight of something sitting on the edge of my bed, felt the mattress compress, felt breath on the back of my neck that smelled like that basement smell, chemical and sweet and alive. I turned on every light. Nothing was there, but I could still feel it, watching me with something that was not quite sight, knowing me with something that was not quite thought. I am writing this now from a motel 40 miles away. I left everything in that house. My tools, my clothes, everything. I got in my truck at 4 a.m. and I drove until the sun came up. The real estate agent will not return my calls. The bank will foreclose. I will declare bankruptcy. None of it matters, because I know the truth now. That house does not want to be empty. It needs someone inside it, needs someone close to that wall, needs someone for whatever's behind there to know and breathe and wait for. 6 families figured it out and ran. I am number 7. And late at night, when I am trying to sleep in this anonymous motel room, I can still hear footsteps outside my door. I can still smell that chemical sweetness. I can still feel something sitting on the edge of my bed, waiting, patient, knowing that eventually I will run out of money and have nowhere left to go except back to Kirkwood Street. Back to the house that every family left. Back to the darkness that knows my name. Story 5. Siren in Milford. The siren started at 3 a.m, and nobody could turn it off. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know exactly how insane that statement lands. But I am telling you this happened to me, to all of us, and I need someone to understand what occurred in Milford, Pennsylvania before the story gets buried beneath official denials and convenient explanations. My name is David. I moved to Milford about 8 months ago, looking for peace. I worked remote for an insurance company back then, which meant I could live anywhere the internet reached. I found a quiet town nestled between wooded ridges in the middle of Pennsylvania, a place where the main street had 3 stoplights and a diner that served meatloaf on Thursdays. The house cost almost nothing. Nobody warned me about the siren. Nobody mentioned anything unusual. The first night I heard it, I thought the building was under attack. The sound ripped through my sleeping body like an electric shock. Not gradual, not something that built. One moment I was dreaming about my office. The next moment, a terrifying, piercing wail filled the house. The emergency siren from the town hall. I knew that sound. Everyone in America knows that sound. Tornado sirens, civil defense warnings, the noise designed to trigger panic and immediate action. This one screamed and screamed and screamed. I grabbed my phone. 3 a.m. No texts, no alerts, no emergency broadcast system message. Nothing on social media about why the siren was active. I stumbled downstairs, looked out the windows. The street was dark and empty. No fire trucks, no signs of anything dangerous. Just that haunting, nightmarish wail continuing endlessly into the darkness. After 7 minutes, the siren stopped. The silence afterward felt even worse than the noise. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. I checked the town's social media pages, the local news website, everything. Nothing. No explanation. No posts about a false alarm. No emergency. No reason. I called the non-emergency police line. The dispatcher sounded tired and annoyed. Yes, they had heard it. No, they had no idea why it activated. The station chief was looking into it. Probably a mechanical failure. Just go back to sleep. It happens sometimes. But it did not happen sometimes. Not before I moved there. Over the next week, the siren sounded 3 more times. Always between 2 and 5 in the morning. Always for somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. Always followed by that impossible silence and complete lack of explanation. I started keeping a log. I started asking neighbors. Their responses shifted from casual confusion to something darker. Something like fear. An older woman named Catherine, who lived 3 doors down, mentioned she had lived in Milford for 32 years. She said the siren had never, ever malfunctioned before. Not once. The town maintained it regularly. A man came out quarterly to inspect the system. Everything was always in perfect working order. Another neighbor, a guy named Marcus who worked at the local hardware store, told me something that made my blood run cold. He said 3 other families had left town in the past month. Just packed up and moved. No real explanation given. They just left. When I asked why, Marcus looked away and changed the subject. The escalation started during my second week. I was sitting at my desk, working through emails when my screen flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. The power was steady. The internet connection remained stable, but my monitor kept cutting to black for fractions of a second. Behind me, the television in my bedroom switched on by itself. I went upstairs and found it showing static. I turned it off. It turned itself back on. I unplugged it. The television stayed off, but the house immediately felt even colder than it had before. That night, the siren started again. This time I did something different. I put on shoes and a jacket and walked outside. The night was chilling and damp, fog rolling between the old houses like something alive. I walked toward the town hall, toward where the siren's alarm was mounted on the roof. Other people were standing outside now too. I counted 7 of them on the street. An older man, 2 women, a younger couple, all of us staring upward at the siren, listening to that terrifying noise pouring into the darkness. I approached the couple. My heart was pounding. My mouth felt dry. I asked if they knew anything. The man, tall with hollow eyes, told me he had called town hall. Reached the emergency coordinator. The man had insisted the siren system was offline. Completely offline. The backup batteries had been removed for maintenance 2 weeks ago. The system could not possibly be sounding. Yet there it was, screaming above us, wailing into the night with a sound that felt almost alive, almost conscious. The disturbing noise filled the entire town, echoing off the ridges surrounding Milford like we were trapped in some sort of eerie amphitheater designed specifically to amplify horror. When the siren finally stopped, we all stood in that crushing silence. Nobody wanted to be the first to leave. Nobody wanted to walk back into their house alone. I returned home and immediately got online. I started searching for any history of Milford, anything strange, anything that might explain this creepy, unsettling situation. Local news archives were thin. The town newspaper had only a few months of digital records. But I found something from 1987. A factory explosion, 3 miles outside of town. The siren had been used to warn residents to evacuate. 42 people had died in the blast. The factory had been a chemical manufacturing facility. The cause of the explosion was classified as an accident. But the article hinted at something darker. Something about improper safety procedures. Something about the town council knowing there was danger and doing nothing. That night, I could not sleep. Every creak in the house felt intentional. Every shadow seemed to move on its own. Every sound from outside might have been the beginning of that terrifying siren again. It got worse from there. The next day, my neighbors started vanishing. Not all at once, one by one. Catherine, the older woman who had lived there 32 years, simply did not answer her door anymore. Her car remained in the driveway. Her lights stayed off. When I checked her back window, the house looked empty, but her belongings were still there. Her clothing still hung in the closet. Her dishes still sat in the sink, dirty and waiting to be washed. Marcus from the hardware store called me that evening. His voice was tight with panic. He said people were leaving. Not packing and moving gradually, just leaving, abandoning their homes, getting in their cars in the middle of the day and driving out of town, never looking back. He said at least 20 families had gone in the past 2 days. I could have left with them. I should have left with them. But something held me there. A stubborn need to understand. A horrifying curiosity that overrode basic survival instinct. I stayed in that house and waited. The siren started every night after that. Different times, different durations, but always there. Always that terrifying, unsettling, chilling sound that seemed to carry some kind of message just beyond my comprehension. During the day, I would drive around town. The streets grew emptier. The fear became almost tangible, like a weight pressing down on everything. I found the power was failing in random sections of town. Streetlights would flicker and die. Traffic lights would freeze on red or green. The internet connection would drop and reconnect without warning. Everything was becoming unreliable, degrading, like the town itself was slowly falling apart. Then I discovered the logs. The emergency coordinator kept digital records. I managed to get access through a friend who worked for the county. Every emergency siren activation, every test, every false alarm, all documented with timestamps and reasons. The record showed that the last time the siren had activated was in 1987. Nothing since then, not a single sound from that system for over 30 years. Until recently. But the logs showed no recent activations. Nothing. The system had remained dormant and inactive. According to every official record, the siren had never sounded during my time in Milford. The disturbing noise that I had heard 8 times, the terrifying wail that had awakened me countless nights, the eerie sound that had driven half the town to abandon their homes. According to the records, none of it had happened. That was when I truly understood the horrifying truth. That was when the fear stopped being about an external threat and became something deeper, something that invaded my mind itself. The siren was not real. Not in the way I understood reality to be. But it was happening anyway. Everyone had heard it. Everyone was running. But officially, provably, according to every system and record, the siren did not exist. I sat in my car outside the town hall, hands trembling, trying to process what this nightmare meant. If the siren was not real, what was it? A mass hallucination? Something from outside of our normal existence? Something trying to communicate a disturbing message? That night, I walked up to the roof of the town hall. I wanted to see the siren in person, to touch it, to confirm it was actually there. The night was impossibly dark, clouds covering every star. The roof was empty. No siren, no equipment, nothing but weathered concrete and the desolate, crushing darkness surrounding the building. But I could hear the sound. Even standing directly underneath where the siren should have been mounted, I could hear it blaring through the night. The terrifying noise was coming from everywhere and nowhere. It filled the entire sky. It came from the ground beneath my feet. It seemed to originate from inside my own head. That was when I understood. The siren was not in the town. It was in us, in our minds, in some space between conscious and unconscious thought. The 1987 explosion had left something behind. Something that existed outside of normal reality. Something that had been waiting for the right moment to reach out. I left Milford the next morning. I drove away and I did not look back. I abandoned the house. I left my belongings. I emptied my bank account and rented a small apartment in Ohio under a different name. I work at a different job now. A job where nobody knows me. A job where I never have to explain where I came from. But I still hear the siren sometimes. Late at night, when I'm alone in the apartment. When the world feels quiet and vulnerable. That terrifying, unsettling, chilling noise echoes through the darkness around me. And I know with absolute certainty that I never truly left Milford. None of us did. The town is still there, still quiet, still waiting. And sometimes, when conditions are right, it reaches out beyond its borders. It calls to people, it draws them in, and when they arrive, they hear the siren too. They listen to that eerie, horrifying sound that does not exist in any official record, any system log, any proof. But it exists nonetheless. It exists in that space between reality and nightmare where things can be simultaneously absent and present, impossible and inevitable, terrifying and undeniable. I am telling you this story because I need someone to know. I need someone to understand that Milford, Pennsylvania is still out there. And if you ever find yourself driving through that area on a dark night, if you ever see signs pointing toward that quiet town nestled between the wooded ridges, I am begging you to keep driving. Do not stop. Do not investigate. Do not listen for the siren. Because once you hear it, once your mind acknowledges its existence, it becomes real for you too. And then, like me, you will discover that you never actually left at all. Story 6, Darkening Street. I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the house numbers skip from 237 to 241. It was a Tuesday night in March, and I was driving through Millbrook, Pennsylvania, a town so small that most people passing through would never even notice it existed. The creepy silence of the road should have warned me. The eerie darkness pressing against my windshield should have made me turn back. But I was looking for Maple Street, and according to the GPS, I was exactly where I needed to be. I was wrong. My name is Marcus, and I am confessing what happened to me on that horrifying night because the terrifying truth needs to be told. 7 people never returned home from Maple Street in Millbrook. 7 people vanished without explanation. The scary part is that I almost became the 8th. I had come to this forgotten Pennsylvania town to research an article about unsolved disappearances. The disturbing pattern had caught my attention years ago. A woman in 1987, a teenage boy in 1994, a man in 2003, a child in 2008. The chilling statistics continued, spaced out just far enough that nobody connected them. But I had connected them. I had spent 3 months digging through newspaper archives, police reports, and interviews. Every single one of these frightening cases shared one thing in common. Maple Street. They all lived on Maple Street. They all disappeared within a few blocks of their homes. And they all vanished without a trace, leaving behind only eerie questions and terrifying silence. The unsettling truth that haunted me most was this. Nobody seemed to talk about it. The town moved on. New families moved into those houses. The nightmare faded into local legend, then into nothing. The scary houses still stood. The ominous street still wound through the sleeping neighborhood. And something was still taking people. I parked my car outside the Millbrook Inn, a small motel that looked like it had been frozen in time since 1975. The creepy neon sign flickered weakly, the nightmare version of hospitality. I checked in, paid cash, and went to my room. I did not want to be remembered. I did not want anyone to know why I was here. That instinct, that terrible gut feeling, may have saved my life. I spent all of Wednesday in the library, pulling microfiche records and photocopying articles. The horrifying stories painted a picture of systematic disappearances that the authorities seemed unwilling to investigate with any real intensity. A missing person here, a missing person there. Always on Maple Street, always near their homes, always at night. The scary part was the pattern nobody wanted to see. The terrifying reality that Maple Street was not just unlucky, it was hungry. By Thursday morning, I had made a decision. I was going to walk Maple Street. I was going to see this disturbing place for myself. I was going to understand why it was creepy, why it was different, why people who lived there never came back home. The eerie path from my motel to Maple Street took me through the older part of town. The nightmare landscape of abandoned storefronts and boarded-up buildings. This was a town that had been dying for decades. The population had shrunk. The businesses had closed. The chilling emptiness was everywhere. The scary feeling of being watched grew stronger as I walked. The unsettling sensation that something was very wrong in Millbrook never left me. Maple Street revealed itself slowly as I approached. At first, it looked normal. Suburban homes set back from the road, well-maintained yards. The terrifying normalcy was what struck me most. There was nothing visibly wrong with this street. There were no obvious signs of danger or darkness. And yet, the creepy air was thick. The disturbing atmosphere pressed against my skin like something alive. I walked slowly down the sidewalk. I passed the house where Martha Holloway had lived before she vanished in 1987. The scary details from the newspaper article came back to me. She had been 34 years old, a librarian. She had left her house at 7 in the evening to walk to a neighbor's home, just 3 houses down. She never arrived. The terrifying truth was that nobody found her. Not then, not ever. The eerie darkness had simply swallowed her whole. The next house belonged to the family of Kevin Mitchell. Kevin was 17 when he disappeared in 1994. The nightmare of his parents must have been unimaginable. He had been walking home from his girlfriend's house. The chilling details said his route would have taken him right down this street. The scary part was that his family found his shoes the next morning, sitting neatly on the sidewalk in front of their property. The horrifying implication was clear. He had almost made it home. He had been just steps away from safety. Something had stopped him. I stood in front of that house for 10 minutes, just staring. The unsettling feeling grew stronger. The disturbing energy of the place was becoming undeniable. I could feel something here. Something dark and terrifying and very, very real. The creepy sensation crawled up my spine. The eerie presence seemed to be watching me watching the house. That is when I noticed something I had not expected. There were no children on Maple Street. Not one. I had been walking for 15 minutes, and I had not seen a single child playing outside, riding a bike, or walking with a parent. The terrifying realization hit me hard. The families who lived here had learned to keep their children inside. They had adapted to the nightmare. They had accepted the darkness. I continued walking. The sky was starting to darken. The afternoon was becoming evening, and I was becoming increasingly aware of how isolated this street felt. The eerie stretch of road seemed to expand around me. The disturbing atmosphere grew thicker. The creepy feeling became something more concrete. The unsettling fear was no longer intellectual. It was physical. It was real. Then I saw it. The house at 239 Maple Street. The one that was missing from all the public records. The scary revelation came to me slowly. In all my research, in all the newspaper articles and police reports, in every terrifying account I had found, there were references to disappearances between 237 and 241. But there was no record of what stood between them. The nightmare logic was suddenly clear. The horrifying truth was staring me in the face. The house was old, older than the others. The nightmare architecture seemed wrong, as if the building predated the modern street itself. The creepy structure was covered in dark shingles that had not been maintained in decades. The unsettling windows were dark, all of them, despite the fact that it was still afternoon. The disturbing presence of the house was overwhelming. The terrifying sensation of being near it made my skin crawl. I did not approach it. Even then, even as I was standing on the sidewalk 50 feet away, I could feel something emanating from that dark place. The eerie darkness inside seemed deeper than shadows. The scary quality was something else entirely. Something prehistoric. Something that did not belong to normal human experience. The terrifying truth was becoming impossible to deny. As I stood there staring, I became aware of a sound. A low, distant sound that might have been wind or might have been something else entirely. The creepy noise seemed to come from inside the house. The unsettling quality made me think of voices, but not human voices. The horrifying possibility that I was hearing something else, something that used to be human perhaps, but had become something different. Something nightmare and terrifying and completely wrong, made me want to run. I did not run. Instead, I did something stupid. I took a photograph. My phone was in my hand before I could think better of it. The nightmarish impulse to document what I was seeing overrode my survival instinct. The eerie moment stretched like taffy. The disturbing house seemed to acknowledge the photograph. The creepy feeling changed. It became focused. The unsettling sensation of being watched transformed into the absolute certainty of being noticed. That is when the door opened. There was no sound. The terrifying movement happened in complete silence. The creepy door simply swung inward, revealing absolute darkness beyond. The nightmare blackness inside that house was not the absence of light. It was the presence of something else. The horrifying darkness was active and aware and completely, utterly wrong. I did not see anyone emerge. The unsettling truth was that nobody came out, but I felt the terrifying attention shift toward me. The eerie presence that lived in that dark house had turned its focus in my direction. The scary realization was that I had made a mistake. The disturbing error of taking that photograph had announced my presence. The creepy attention of something very old and very hungry and very real was now fixed directly upon me. I ran. The nightmare became real in that moment. The terrifying sensation of being chased was overwhelming, even though I never saw anything pursuing me. The eerie presence was behind me, around me, inside my head. The creepy fear was the most intense emotion I have ever experienced. The unsettling certainty that something was following me made every muscle in my body scream with adrenaline. I made it back to the motel in 7 minutes. The horrifying distance that should have taken 15 minutes to walk somehow compressed. The creepy impossibility of time and space in that place was becoming clear. The disturbing logic of Maple Street did not follow the rules of the normal world. The terrifying rules that governed that dark street were something else entirely. I packed my belongings in less than 5 minutes. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely function. The nightmare of what I had felt, what I had encountered, was overwhelming. The scary clarity of what lived on Maple Street had burned itself into my consciousness. The horrifying truth was that something ancient and terrifying lived in that house at 239 Maple Street. The eerie reality was that it had been taking people for decades. The creepy pattern was not random. The unsettling disappearances were not accidents. They were feeds. I did not sleep that night. I drove straight through to Ohio. The terrifying need to get away from that town, from that street, from that dark presence, consumed me completely. The creepy compulsion to never return was absolute. The nightmare of what I had experienced was the most real thing I had ever known. 3 days later, I received an email from an unknown address. The disturbing message contained a single line: "You took our photograph. We took yours." Attached was a picture, a photo of me sleeping in my childhood bedroom. 10 years ago, taken from inside my closet. The scary reality of that image broke something inside me. The horrifying truth was that something had been watching me long before I ever came to Maple Street in Millbrook, Pennsylvania. The eerie presence had known who I was. The terrifying certainty was that it had been waiting for me. When I looked up news from Millbrook last week, I found that another family had moved to Maple Street. The creepy normalcy of it was almost worse than the horror. They had a daughter. She was 9 years old. The unsettling nightmare of what might happen to her made me feel sick with terror. I have not been able to return to normal life since that night. The terrifying truth of what exists on Maple Street haunts my every moment. The eerie darkness of that place has infected my reality. The scary knowledge that I was seen, that I was noticed, that something out there knows exactly where I am, consumes me with constant, gnawing fear. Tonight, as I write this, I keep hearing sounds outside my window. The disturbing noises that sound almost like footsteps. The creepy sensation of being observed is constant. The horrifying certainty that it is getting closer, that it is coming for me because I saw it and it saw me, is becoming impossible to deny. The nightmare is not behind me. The terrifying darkness of Maple Street has followed me home. The unsettling truth is that I will never be safe again. The eerie knowledge of what is real, of what exists in the darkness, of what hungers on Maple Street in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, will haunt me until the day I die. And every night, as I sit in my locked house, jumping at every sound, I think of that little girl who just moved in at 237 Maple Street. The scary reality is that the darkness does not stop. The creepy hunger is never satisfied. The horrifying truth is that Maple Street is always looking for new people to take home. The terrifying question that haunts me most is the one I cannot answer. What happens to them when they do not return? Story 7. Lights in Hartfield. I'm going to tell you something that sounds completely insane. I know this because I have tried to explain it to exactly 8 people, and all 8 of them looked at me like I had lost my mind. But I swear on everything I care about that what happened to me in Hartfield, Pennsylvania is absolutely real, and I need someone to know the truth before I forget the details. Before the memories start shifting, before I start doubting myself completely, the story starts with a creepy discovery that I made almost by accident. I was driving north on Interstate 80, heading to meet my brother for a hunting trip in the Pocono Mountains. It was late October, and the sky had that unsettling gray quality that only happens in fall in Pennsylvania. I was bored. The highway had been monotonous for the last 2 hours. Trees, exit signs, the occasional truck rumbling past. My mind was wandering. I was not paying close attention to anything in particular when I noticed the exit sign. Hartfield, population 3,847. There was something strange about the sign. The population number had been painted over, then painted over again. You could see the layers of paint, the desperate attempts to update a number that kept becoming untrue. I do not know why this detail stuck with me, but it did. The image of that compulsively corrected sign would haunt my thoughts for weeks. I did not exit that day. I drove past, but something about Hartfield had wormed its way into my brain like a chilling and ominous itch. I could not stop thinking about a town that was trying so hard to hide how many people lived there, or did not live there. That unsettling feeling would not leave me alone. 3 weeks later, after the hunting trip, after returning to my normal life in New Jersey, I found myself researching Hartfield online. This was a mistake, the kind of mistake that changes everything. The internet had almost nothing about Hartfield. No Wikipedia page, no news articles from the past 20 years. The town seemed to have vanished from collective memory entirely. There was one Reddit thread from 2019 where someone asked about Hartfield, and the replies were cryptic and frightening in their vagueness. A user named True Adventurer wrote, "Do not go there. The town is not empty. Just quiet. Something is wrong with that place. Something very wrong." I should have closed the browser tab right then. I should have forgotten about Hartfield completely and moved on with my life. But I did not. 2 weeks later, I made a terrifying decision that would launch me into a nightmare I still cannot fully explain. I took a vacation day from work. I drove back to Pennsylvania, and I took the exit to Hartfield. The turnoff led to a 2-lane rural road that stretched through dense forest. Trees pressed in from both sides, and the afternoon sun was already sinking toward the horizon. The air felt different here, heavier somehow, the kind of heavy that makes your chest tight. I noticed my hands were gripping the steering wheel too hard. I was nervous about nothing, or nervous about everything. It was impossible to tell the difference. After 15 minutes of driving through absolute wilderness, I saw the first building. It was an old gas station, the kind that had probably been abandoned for 30 years. The pumps were rusted shells. The building itself was collapsing inward, the roof sagging like a tired spine. But the lights were on. I am not exaggerating. The fluorescent lights inside the station were glowing bright and harsh against the darkening sky. The building was shuttered and decrepit and absolutely empty and completely lit up. I drove past it slowly. My foot eased off the accelerator. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around, to drive away, to never think about this place again. But there was another part of me, a curious part, that needed to understand what I was seeing. The road continued. More buildings appeared. A diner with its neon sign still flickering. A small grocery store with lights on inside but nothing visible on the shelves. A hardware store. A church. All of them were dark and abandoned and completely illuminated from within. I understood, in that moment, that I was looking at something impossible. The power company would later confirm what I already knew. Hartfield had been without electricity for nearly 7 years. All of it, the entire town, cut off completely because there were not enough people left to justify the cost of maintaining the grid. The lines had been removed. The connection to the town had been severed. Yet every single building in Hartfield blazed with electric light as if nothing had changed. As if the power was flowing normally. As if the town was alive. I entered the main square of Hartfield at approximately 4:45 in the afternoon. It was the creepiest and most unsettling place I have ever seen in my entire life. The square was lined with small shops and businesses, all of them with their doors closed and windows dark and lights burning inside. A small fountain in the center of the square, long since empty of water, stood like some kind of monument to abandonment. The streets were utterly empty. No people, no cars, no sound except the wind moving through the streets and the faint hum of electricity coming from somewhere I could not identify. I parked my car in the middle of Main Street and sat there for 5 full minutes, just breathing. Just trying to understand what I was experiencing. The rational part of my brain was offering explanations. Maybe there was an emergency power system. Maybe it was a hoax. Maybe this was some kind of elaborate prank. But none of those explanations felt true. The fear I felt in that moment was pure and primal and completely overwhelming. I got out of my car. This was a bad idea. Everything about this was a bad idea. The air outside was cold and tasted like rust and something else. Something organic. Something dead. The hum of the electricity was louder now that I was standing on the street. It came from everywhere and nowhere. The lights in the buildings cast shadows on the sidewalk, and those shadows seemed to move slightly even though there was no wind to move them. This was a horrifying optical illusion caused by the flickering fluorescent lights above. Or at least that is what I told myself. I walked to the nearest shop, a clothing store called Rothstein Menswear. Through the window, I could see the interior perfectly. The lights were very bright. The racks of clothing were still hanging on their rods, covered in dust so thick they looked gray. The mannequins stood in the window display, forever frozen in poses of casual elegance, their faces turned away from me. Behind them, the lights of the shop continued to glow. The register was still on the counter. The price tags were still on the merchandise. Nothing had been disturbed. Nothing had been cleaned. Nothing had been touched in so many years that the entire shop seemed to belong to another world. I pressed my face against the glass to see deeper into the store. And that is when I noticed something that made my blood go completely cold. In the back of the shop, near the register, there was a shadow. A dark shape that did not belong among all the bright illumination. The shape of something humanoid. Something standing perfectly still in the corner of the store, watching the window. I jerked my face away from the glass. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I turned around to look at the other shops, and that is when the full scope of what I was seeing became clear. In almost every window, in the back corners of the stores and shops, there were shapes. Dark silhouettes. Standing still, watching. The panic was rising in my chest like a tide. I was breathing too fast. My hands were shaking. I needed to get back to my car. I needed to get out of Hartfield immediately. I needed to drive away and never think about this place again. But before I could move, I heard the sound. It was a door closing somewhere in the town. A wooden door. Heavy and deliberate. The sound echoed off the brick buildings and stone streets and seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then another door closed. And another, all throughout the town. In the shops and buildings and houses I could not see, doors were closing. Methodically, one after another, getting closer. The creatures, or whatever they were beginning to move. I ran. I sprinted back toward my car, my feet pounding on the concrete sidewalk, my breath coming in gasps that hurt my throat. I did not look back. I could not afford to look back. I could hear the doors continuing to close, and now I could hear other sounds as well. Footsteps, the shuffling of feet on pavement, the creeping approach of something that had been waiting in the darkness for I did not know how long. I fumbled with my car keys as I ran. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. I got to my car and wrenched open the side door and threw myself inside. The engine roared to life, and I threw the car into reverse without looking. I felt the impact of something hitting the back bumper, and I heard the terrible screech of metal on metal, but I did not care. I did not care if I destroyed the car. I only cared about distance. I drove backwards into the middle of the street and then spun the wheel and shifted into drive. The car lurched forward, and I did not look at the street behind me. I did not want to see what had been walking toward me in the darkness of Hartfield. The road out of town stretched ahead of me like an escape route. I pressed the accelerator as hard as it would go. The car was doing 70 miles per hour on a narrow country road, and I did not slow down. The trees blurred past on both sides. The darkness was growing thicker. The evening was turning into true night. I was almost out. I could feel the town receding behind me, its horrible gravity loosening its grip. I was going to make it. I was going to drive away from Hartfield and forget any of this had ever happened. That was when my car, His headlights illuminated something on the road ahead. A figure, standing directly in the center of the road, completely still, facing my car. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded, my tires screaming against the asphalt. I was maybe 50 feet from the figure, closing the distance rapidly. I could not tell what it was. In the harsh glare of my headlights, it appeared to be a person. A man, I thought, though something about its proportions was subtly wrong. The limbs were too long. The posture was too rigid. The head was tilted at an angle that no human neck should be able to achieve. The car was not slowing down fast enough. I was going to hit it. And then, in the final moment before impact, the figure moved. Not walked, not ran, simply vanished from the road. One moment it was there, backlit by my headlights. The next moment it was gone. Not behind a tree, not off the side of the road. Simply gone. My car was still moving forward, still skidding. I regained some control and managed to steer around the spot where the figure had been standing. I did not know if I had hit it or if it had simply disappeared. I was past reason now. I was completely governed by fear. I drove for 20 minutes without stopping. The forest eventually gave way to more rural road, and the rural road eventually led back to the highway. I did not feel safe until I saw the lights of other cars, until I saw a truck stop restaurant glowing in the distance, until I was back in the normal world where electricity came from power lines that made sense and buildings stood empty in expected ways. But I have never been able to fully escape what I witnessed in Hartfield. The terrifying truth is this: I did research after that night. Serious research. I found out that Hartfield really had been losing population for decades. People had been leaving since the 1980s. It was not a sudden exodus. It was slow and gradual, like the town was slowly draining of life. The power company cut off service 7 years ago. At that time, the population of Hartfield was listed as 23 people. 23. But the lights never went off. Despite repeated confirmations that the power had been shut off, despite the removal of power lines, despite the physical impossibility of it, the lights in Hartfield continued to burn every night. I have tried to rationalize this in every way possible. There must be an explanation. There must be a logical reason for the phenomenon. But I was there. I saw the lights. I saw the shapes in the buildings. I heard the doors closing. I felt the thing that was chasing me. The worst part is that I know I am not the only person who has seen this. The Reddit thread I mentioned, the one where someone warned never to go to Hartfield, has grown since I first read it. Now there are dozens of posts. Dozens of people describing their own experiences. All of them similar to mine. All of them terrifying. All of them describing the same horrifying phenomenon. The lights, the shapes in the windows, the doors closing, the sense of being hunted by something that should not exist. Last month, someone posted a new thread asking a simple question. Why are the lights still on in Hartfield? The most recent response came from someone who claimed to be from the town. The post simply said, "We are still here. We are still waiting. The lights are on because we never left. We cannot leave. Something happened in Hartfield a long time ago, and now nobody can leave. The lights stay on because we stay on. Come visit us again. We would very much like a visitor." The post was deleted within hours, but not before I read it. I have not slept properly since that night. Every time I close my eyes, I see the shapes in the windows of those shops. I hear the doors closing. I feel that sense of being hunted by something unknown and unsettling and completely terrifying. I do not know what I saw in Hartfield. I do not know if those shapes were the last remaining residents transformed into something else, or if they were something entirely different. Something that had taken over the town completely. What I do know is that the lights in Hartfield are still on. The power company confirms this. There are occasional reports, despite having no electricity, despite being an abandoned and dying Pennsylvania town, the buildings of Hartfield still glow with light every single night. And I believe that something in that town is still waiting, still hoping for another visitor, still hungry for whatever it is that keeps me human and warm and alive. If you are listening to this, and if you ever see a sign for Hartfield on Interstate 80, I am begging you, do not take that exit. Do not drive into that town. Do not try to understand what the lights mean or why they are still burning. Because once you have seen the lights in Hartfield, you will never be able to forget them. And I am not entirely sure that forgetting is even possible anymore. Not after what I saw, not after what I felt. Some part of me is still standing on Main Street in Hartfield. Some part of me never made it out. And I think that part of me is still being watched by the shapes in the darkness. Every single night, in the buildings that glow with impossible light, something is remembering my face. Something is waiting for me to come back. Something is patient and eternal and completely terrifying in its hunger. The lights in Hartfield are still on, and they are calling me home. Story 8. Funeral no one remembered. I need to tell you something that happened in my hometown. Something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Because 3 months ago, I attended a funeral in Pennsylvania that never should have existed. And now I am the only person who remembers it happened at all. My name is David Carver, and I have lived in Millbrook, Pennsylvania my entire life. Population 863. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where nothing stays secret for long, where a funeral brings out the whole town. That is what makes this so terrifying. That is what keeps me awake at 3 a.m, wondering if I am losing my mind or if something far worse is happening. It started on a Wednesday in October. Cold, the kind of cold that gets into your bones and settles there. I was driving home from my shift at the hardware store when I saw the sign outside St. Catherine's Church. Black letters on white background. Simple, direct. Funeral service, 2 p.m. Saturday, all welcome. Nothing unusual about that, except I could not remember hearing about anyone dying. In a town this small, death is news. People talk. They bring casseroles. They whisper in the grocery store aisles. But there had been nothing. No gossip. No flowers delivered to any house. No obituary in the Millbrook Gazette. I thought maybe it was someone from out of town. A relative of one of the older families. It happens sometimes. Still, something about that sign bothered me. The way it did not list a name. Just, all welcome, in those stark black letters. Saturday came gray and heavy with the threat of rain. I almost did not go. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and in a town where nothing ever happens, even a mystery funeral feels like an event. I told myself I would pay my respects. Find out who had passed. Maybe learn something I had missed. The parking lot at St. Catherine, this was full. I recognized every car. Jim Peterson, his pickup. The Miller family van. Sarah Chen's old sedan. The whole town had turned out. That should have been my first real warning. In all my 42 years, I had never seen the entire town at a funeral unless it was someone important. Someone everyone knew and loved. Inside, the church was packed. Every pew filled, people standing along the walls. The air thick with that particular smell of old wood and candle wax and something else. Something I could not quite identify. Something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The casket sat at the front. Closed. Dark wood. Silver handles. Expensive looking. A single arrangement of white lilies on top. No photographs. No memorial display. Nothing to indicate who lay inside. I slid into a pew near the back next to Tom Bradley, who runs the gas station. I leaned toward him, keeping my voice low. "Who is it?" I whispered. Tom looked at me with blank eyes. "What? Who died?" He frowned, like I had asked him to solve a complicated math problem. Then he turned back to face the front. Did not answer, just sat there, staring ahead with everyone else. That was when the fear started creeping in. Real fear, the kind that starts in your stomach and spreads through your chest like ice water. I looked around, familiar faces everywhere. My dentist, my neighbor, the woman who cuts my hair, the high school principal, all sitting in perfect silence, all staring straight ahead. No one crying, no one comforting anyone else, no one doing anything except sitting and staring and waiting. The organ began to play, low and mournful. Reverend Matthews walked to the pulpit. He is 74 years old and has presided over every funeral in this town for the past 30 years. His hands shook slightly as he opened his Bible. "We gather today," he said, his voice echoing in the unusual quiet, "to remember and honor a life now passed from this world into the next." He did not say a name, did not mention family members, did not share memories or stories or any of the normal things you hear at a funeral. He just read passages from Scripture, generic, impersonal, like he was reading from a script he did not quite understand. I kept waiting for someone to speak, to stand up and share a memory, to cry, to do something human, but everyone just sat there, frozen. The silence between the organ music was suffocating, disturbing on a level one could not explain. The service lasted exactly 27 minutes. I know because I kept checking my watch, feeling increasingly desperate to leave but somehow unable to move. When it ended, people filed out row by row in perfect order. No one spoke. No one made eye contact. They just walked to their cars and drove away. I stayed behind, waited until the church was empty except for me and Reverend Matthews. He was gathering his things at the altar, moving slowly like a man much older than his years. "Reverend," I called out. My voice sounded too loud in the empty space. "Whose funeral was that?" He turned to look at me. For just a moment, I saw something in his eyes. Confusion maybe, or fear, something that matched what I was feeling. Then it was gone, replaced by that same blank expression I had seen on Tom's face. "I am sorry," he said slowly. "What funeral?" My blood went cold. "The funeral we just had. 20 minutes ago. The casket is right there." I pointed. The casket was gone. The lilies were gone. The front of the church looked exactly as it always did. Empty, waiting for Sunday service. I ran outside. The parking lot was empty except for my truck. The sign that had advertised the funeral was blank. Whiteboard. No letters. Nothing. I drove straight to the hardware store where I work. Bill Murphy owns it, has for 40 years. He was restocking shelves when I burst in. "Bill, were you at the funeral today?" He looked up, confused. "What funeral?" "At St. Catherine." "Yes." 2 o'clock. The whole town was there. He set down the box he was holding, studied my face like he was trying to decide if I was joking or sick. "David, I have been here since noon. Had lunch at my desk. There was no funeral today." I pulled out my phone. Started calling people. My sister, my best friend since grade school. The mayor. Same response from everyone. Confusion. Concern. Questions about whether I was feeling all right. No one remembered a funeral. No one remembered the sign. No one remembered sitting in that church. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about that casket. That silence. Those blank faces. I got up at 2 in the morning and drove back to St. Catherine. The building was dark. Locked. I walked around it 3 times, looking for any sign of what had happened. Nothing. Monday morning, I went to the church office. Mrs. Hendricks has been the secretary there for 35 years. She knows everything that happens at St. Catherine. "I need to see the records from Saturday's funeral," I told her. She pulled up the schedule on her computer, scrolled, frowned. "We had a funeral Saturday. 2 o'clock. She clicked on the entry. "No name listed though. That is strange. We always have the deceased. Yes, name." My heart was hammering. So it did happen, according to this. Yes. But I do not remember it. She looked genuinely troubled. "I should remember. I was here. I must have been here. But I cannot recall anything about it." "What about a death certificate?" "There has to be a death certificate filed somewhere." She searched. County records, state database, hospital reports. Nothing. No death certificate for anyone in Millbrook or the surrounding counties for the past 2 weeks. "This does not make sense," she said quietly. "We held a funeral for someone who never officially died." I went to the Gazette office next, asked to see the obituaries from the past month. Nothing unusual. The editor, Frank Wilson, pulled up his files. "We did not run any obituary for a Saturday funeral," he said. "If there had been one, we would have published it Thursday or Friday. But St. Catherine has it in their records. The funeral happened." Frank leaned back in his chair. "David, I have known you your whole life. You are not the type to make things up. But what you are saying is impossible. A funeral without a body? Without a death? Without anyone remembering it?" I spent the next 2 weeks investigating. I found 7 people who admitted, when pressed hard enough, that they had a strange gap in their memory from that Saturday afternoon. 2 to 3 hours they could not account for. But they could not remember why. Could not remember being at a funeral. Just a blank space where time should have been. The church records remained, proof that something had occurred. But with each passing day, even that seemed less certain. When I checked again 3 weeks later, the entry had changed. Now it just said, "Event, 2 p.m. Saturday," with no mention of a funeral at all. I started having nightmares. Always the same. I am sitting in that church again. The organ playing. That casket at the front. But this time when I look around, the pews are empty. I am alone, and the casket is slowly opening. I wake up before I see what is inside. Always before I see. Last week, I saw another sign outside St. Catherine's. "Funeral service, 2 p.m. Saturday, all welcome." Different date, same message, same lack of a name. I asked everyone I could find. No one had heard about anyone dying. The Gazette had no obituary planned, but the sign was there. Real. Waiting. Saturday came. I did not go. I could not. I drove 2 hours out of town instead. Spent the day in a diner, drinking coffee, watching the clock. When I got home that evening, I started calling people again. No one remembered a funeral. The church secretary had no record of one. But I know it happened. Just like before, another funeral no one will remember. Another person who never officially died. I am telling you this because I need someone to know. Someone outside Millbrook. Someone who can remember when I forget. Because I think that is what is coming. I think whatever is taking everyone else, this memories is coming from mine too. Even now, as I write this, parts of that first funeral are getting fuzzy. Harder to recall, like trying to remember a dream after waking. But I remember the important parts. I remember the fear. I remember that casket. And I remember something else. Something I have not told anyone because it sounds insane. When everyone was filing out of the church, moving in that strange silent order, I glanced back one last time. The casket was still there, just for a moment before it vanished. And I saw something. Movement. From inside. Like whatever was in there was trying to get out. Or maybe it already had. There is another funeral scheduled for this Saturday. I know because I drove past the church this morning and the sign is up again. I will not go. But I think it does not matter anymore. I think whether I go or not, I will be there. We all will. And none of us will remember. Except this time, I've written everything down. Hidden copies in places I will find them later. Evidence that something happened. Proof that I am not crazy. But I wonder, as I seal these pages, if proof matters when reality itself is changing. When entire memories can be erased. When the dead can be buried without ever dying. If you are listening to this, if somehow this recording survives, then you know something the rest of us forgot. You know that in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, we have been attending funerals that should not exist. Saying goodbye to people who were never alive. Or maybe saying goodbye to something else entirely. Something that wears death like a costume and watches us from inside those closed caskets. I do not know what happens next, but I know I am afraid. And I know that fear is the only thing I trust anymore. Because everything else in this town is a lie. Story 9. Pennsylvania town that wakes up at midnight. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened in Ashford. This is not fiction. This is not some creepy campfire tale I heard from a friend of a friend. What I experienced in that forgotten Pennsylvania town changed me in ways I am still trying to process. The nightmares come every single night now. The fear never leaves. It started 3 months ago when my car broke down on Route 19, somewhere between Pittsburgh and nowhere. The engine just died. No warning, no sputtering, just silence. My phone had no signal. The late October darkness felt thick and alive around me. I could see a cluster of lights maybe 2 miles down the road, so I started walking. The temperature dropped fast. My breath came out in clouds. The only sounds were my footsteps on cracked asphalt and the wind moving through empty fields on both sides of the highway. The town sign appeared in my flashlight beam. Ashford, Pennsylvania. Population 247. The number had been spray painted over with red letters that said, "Do not count us." My stomach twisted. Something felt wrong immediately. The streets were too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl because, something is hiding in it. Every house was dark. No porch lights. No glow from television screens. No cars in driveways. The street lamps worked, but they flickered in this disturbing rhythm, like they were struggling to stay alive. I walked down Main Street looking for any sign of life. A gas station. A motel. Anything. The storefronts were all abandoned. Windows covered in dust and cobwebs. A diner called Marlene is sat on the corner with chairs stacked on tables inside. Through the grimy glass, I could see plates still sitting on the counter. Food rotted on them. The disturbing smell reached me even outside. I found a small motel called the Ashford Inn. The neon sign buzzed and crackled. The office door was unlocked. Inside, everything looked normal except for the layer of dust covering the front desk. A calendar on the wall was stuck on March 2019. That was 5 years ago. A bell sat on the counter with a handwritten note beside it. "Ring for service. We are always here." I rang the bell. The sound echoed through the empty building. Nothing happened. I rang it again. Still nothing. My hands were shaking now. Not from cold, from fear. The kind of fear that comes from your gut, from some ancient part of your brain that knows when danger is near even if you cannot see it yet. I grabbed a key from the board behind the desk. Room 7. I just needed somewhere to wait until morning. Somewhere to charge my phone if the power worked. Then I would walk back to my car and figure something out. The room was basic. Bed, nightstand, bathroom, television that looked 20 years old. But it was clean. Too clean for a place that seemed abandoned. The sheets were fresh. No dust anywhere. A mint sat on the pillow like someone had just prepared the room. That is when the horrifying realization hit me. Someone was maintaining this place. Someone was still here. I locked the door and pushed the dresser against it. My phone was completely dead. I plugged it into the wall and waited. The clock on the nightstand glowed 9:47 p.m. I sat on the bed and tried to think. Tried to make sense of what I was seeing. A whole town abandoned but somehow still functioning. Lights on. Rooms cleaned. It made no sense. The hours crawled by. I kept watching that clock. 10:15, 10:42, 11:29. My phone finally powered on at 11:53 p.m. but still no signal. I pulled up my GPS, but it could not find any satellites. I tried to access my offline maps, but they would not load. The phone was working, but it was like the town existed in some dead zone that technology could not touch. 11:59 p.m. I stared at the clock as the numbers changed. Midnight. That is when it started. The footsteps. They came from above me. Slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the ceiling. Back and forth. Someone was in the room directly above mine. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Multiple sets. Walking past my room. I heard doors opening and closing. Voices started, not talking to each other. Just voices. Some humming. Some whispering. Some making sounds that were almost words, but not quite. I pressed my ear against the door. The sounds were coming from everywhere now. The entire motel had woken up. I could hear water running in pipes. Televisions turning on. That disturbing symphony of normal domestic sounds that felt completely terrifying in this context. I pulled out my phone and started recording audio. I do not know why. Maybe for proof. Maybe because some part of me knew I might not survive this and wanted evidence left behind. The sounds continued for hours. Always moving. Always active. But never coming to my door. It was like whatever was out there knew I was inside but was choosing to leave me alone. At 4:47 a.m., everything stopped. Instant silence. Like someone had flipped a switch and turned off the entire town. I waited another hour before I dared to move the dresser and crack open the door. The hallway was empty. I checked the room above mine. The door was unlocked. Inside, the bed was perfectly made. Everything neat and organized, but there was dust everywhere. Thick dust that had clearly been undisturbed for years. No footprints. No sign that anyone had been in that room at all. The chilling truth started to form in my mind, but I refused to accept it yet. I went back to the office. The calendar still showed March 2019, but now there was something new on the desk. A guest book. I opened it. The last entry was from last night. My name, my room number, written in handwriting that looked exactly like mine. But I had not written anything in that book. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the book. I flipped back through the pages. Hundreds of entries, all different names, all different dates spanning back years. But every single entry had the same checkout time. Did not check out. Still here. The horrifying pattern became clear. People came to Ashford. People stayed in this motel. But people did not leave. I ran outside into the early morning darkness. The streets were still empty, but now I noticed something I had missed before. Cars, not in driveways but parked along the streets at odd angles. Dozens of them, all different makes and models, all with expired registration stickers. Some from 10 years ago, some from last year, all abandoned. I started running toward Route 19, toward my car, toward any chance of escape. The sun was starting to rise, but the light only made everything look more disturbing. In the growing dawn, I could see the town clearly now. Every house looked lived in but empty. Toys scattered in yards, laundry on clotheslines that had rotted in the weather, mail piled up in boxes. I reached the edge of town, and that is when I saw it. The barrier, not physical, nothing you could touch, but my body refused to move past the town limits. It was like hitting an invisible wall made of pure terror. Every survival instinct in my body screamed at me to stop, to turn around, that something terrible would happen if I took one more step. I tried to force myself forward. My legs would not move. The fear was overwhelming, paralyzing, unnatural. This was not normal fear. This was something being done to me. A sound behind me made me spin around. An old man stood in the middle of the street. He wore pajamas and slippers. His face was hollow, empty. He raised one hand and pointed at me. Then he spoke. His voice sounded like wind through dead leaves. You cannot leave during the day. The town needs us awake at night. We are the ones who keep it alive. We are the ones who walk and talk and fill the empty spaces. When darkness comes, you will understand. You will join us. You will wake up at midnight and you will never sleep through the night again. He turned and walked away, disappeared into one of the houses. I stood there shaking. The sun was fully up now. I had maybe 12 hours until midnight. 12 hours to figure out how to escape. I spent the day searching every building, looking for answers, looking for a way out. I found a library and went through old newspapers. The articles told the story in pieces. Ashford had been a normal town until March 2019. That is when people started reporting the sounds. Movement at night, footsteps, voices, doors opening and closing, but no one could find the source. Then people started disappearing, not leaving town, just disappearing from their beds in the middle of the night. Their bodies would be found in the morning standing in random places around town. Standing in intersections, in yards, in the middle of stores. Always standing, always facing the same direction, eyes open but seeing nothing. The last newspaper was dated March 31st, 2019. The headline read, Entire town population missing. The article described how state police had come to investigate. They found every resident of Ashford standing motionless throughout the town at sunrise. When the police tried to speak to them, they would not respond, would not move, would not acknowledge the officers were there. Then the sun set, and at midnight, the entire town woke up. The police fled. They sealed the roads leading into Ashford. But the barriers did not hold. People still found their way here. The town called to them somehow, drew them in, trapped them. I was running out of time. The sun was setting. I had tried everything. I could not force myself past the town limits. I could not get a signal on my phone. I had found no other living person who could help me. The disturbing reality was setting in. I was going to become one of them. The clock in the library read 11:45 p.m. I watched the minutes tick by. My whole body was tense. The fear was so intense I thought I might pass out. But I stayed conscious. I stayed aware. I needed to know what happened at midnight. 11:59 p.m. The numbers changed. Midnight. And I felt it, something inside me shifting, like a switch being flipped in my brain. My body stood up without my permission. My legs started walking without me telling them to. I was still conscious, still aware, but I was not in control anymore. I walked out of the library, into the street. All around me, others were emerging from buildings, walking in their sleep but not sleeping. We were all awake, all aware, all trapped inside our own bodies as something else controlled us. We walked through the town in patterns, opening doors, turning on lights, moving furniture, creating the sounds of life in a dead place. We were ghosts performing the routine of living for something that watched from the darkness. Something that fed on our activity, our presence, our trapped consciousness. This went on for hours. My mind screamed, but my body obeyed. I understood now. This was the nightmare. Not being killed, not being hurt, being trapped inside yourself forever. Being forced to wake up every midnight and perform this horrifying ritual while your mind stayed aware and helpless. At 5 a.m., the control released. My body was mine again. I collapsed in the street, sobbing, terrified, knowing that this would be my existence now. Every night, forever, waking up at midnight, walking, moving, feeding whatever dark presence owned this town. But I am telling you this now. I am still here in Ashford, still trapped. It is daytime as I record this on my phone. I found a weak signal on the edge of town, just enough to upload this audio. This is my warning. Do not come to Ashford, Pennsylvania. Do not stop here if your car breaks down. Do not answer if the town calls to you in your dreams. Because once you arrive, you never leave. You become one of us. One of the sleepwalkers who wake at midnight and perform our horrifying routine until the sun rises. Aware, conscious, trapped, the town is always hungry. Always watching the roads. Always waiting for the next person to arrive. The next person to join our terrible dance in the darkness. Every night I wake up. Every night I walk. And every night I pray that someone hears this and stays away. The sun is setting now. I can feel it coming. That pull inside me, that switch preparing to flip. In a few hours, I will wake up at midnight. And I will walk again. Do not look for me. Do not try to save me. Just stay away from Ashford. The town that wakes up at midnight is waiting. Story 10. Town that won. To let you leave, I made it 30 miles before my car died. That is the first and most important detail of my story, because those 30 miles became a countdown to something terrifying. Something that has haunted me for the past 6 months. Something that I now understand was never really about escape at all. I was already dead the moment I decided to leave Millbrook, Pennsylvania. I just did not know it yet. My name is David. I am 47 years old. I work as an insurance adjuster, or at least I did before everything changed. I am telling you this story because I need someone to know what happened in that small town, because the official accounts are all lies, because the people there are still pretending that everything is normal, and because I am terrified that if I do not speak about it soon, I will forget it altogether. That thought might be the most disturbing part of all. Millbrook is a town you have never heard of. It sits in the mountains of central Pennsylvania, nestled between 2 state highways, surrounded by forests so dense and dark that you cannot see more than 50 feet into it in any direction. The population is around 2,000 people. The main street has a pharmacy, a diner, a hardware store, and a bank. There are 4 churches, all of them empty most days, all of them with crosses facing outward like they are warning people to stay away. The whole place feels frozen in time, as if someone paused the year 1985 and never pressed play again. I moved there in March because I inherited my mother's house. She had lived there for 43 years, had not left in over a decade, and when she died at 82, I learned that the property was mine. The house needed work. The roof was rotting. The plumbing was from another era, but it was free, and I had just gone through a difficult divorce, and I thought that maybe a small town would offer me peace. That maybe I could rent out the property or fix it up and sell it. That maybe some quiet time in the mountains would help me remember who I was supposed to be. I should have asked why the real estate agent seemed so relieved when I signed the papers. The first 3 months were fine, uneventful, boring, even. I spent my days fixing the house. The locals were polite but distant. At the diner, people would nod at me and then immediately look away. Conversations at the hardware store were brief and practical. Nobody made eye contact for more than a few seconds. It was exactly the kind of solitude I thought I needed. But in June, something shifted. I noticed it first in small ways. A neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had been friendly enough in March and April. She had brought me a casserole. We had talked on the porch for 10 minutes about the weather in the town. Then one day in mid-June, I saw her at the grocery store. I waved. She looked at me, her face going pale, and she literally turned her cart around and left without buying anything. I remember thinking that was strange, but I dismissed it. That same week, I decided to drive to Scranton for supplies I could not find locally. Scranton is 40 miles away. I packed up my car on a Wednesday morning and told myself I would be back by evening. I left at 9 in the morning. I was looking forward to the drive, to getting out of the suffocating quiet of Millbrook for a few hours. I made it 30 miles before my car died. I was on Route 17, driving through forest on both sides, not another vehicle in sight. The engine made a sound like a dying animal, a grinding noise that turned into silence as I coasted to the shoulder. I sat there for a moment, my hands on the steering wheel, feeling genuinely annoyed. I turned the key. The engine turned over twice and stopped. I got out and called for a tow truck. The local mechanic, a man named Tom Hershey, who I had met only once, arrived 40 minutes later. He looked at my car, looked at me, and his expression shifted into something I can only describe as disappointed. He told me to get in his truck. I asked him what was wrong with the car. He did not answer. He just drove me back to Millbrook, back to the mechanic shop on the edge of town, and he worked on the engine for 3 hours. When I asked him what he had found, he would not tell me. He just said the car would run now, and that I should not try to go to Scranton. I asked him why. He did not answer. I thought he was joking. The next day, I tried again. This time I made it 32 miles. The engine made that same grinding sound, and I coasted to a stop. This time there was a police officer nearby, and he stopped to help. Officer Marks was his name. He called the same tow truck. Tom Hershey came again, and again he brought me back to Millbrook without explaining what was wrong with the car. I did not try to leave for 2 weeks after that. Instead, I started researching. I went to the library and looked through old newspapers. That is where I found the first article, from 1993, about a woman named Eleanor Hartwick who had tried to leave town. She had made it 45 miles before her car broke down on Route 17. She had called for help. The police had brought her back. 2 days later, she had a stroke. She survived but was partially paralyzed. She never left again. There were more articles. A man in 1988 who had tried to leave, whose car had caught fire at mile marker 37. A teenager in 2001 who had driven 40 miles and crashed into a ravine, killing himself. A woman in 2013 who had made it 50 miles before a massive tree fell across the road in perfect calm weather with no wind. I sat in the library, scrolling through faded microfilm, my hands shaking, and I understood that I was looking at a pattern. The distance varied. Sometimes people made it 20 miles, sometimes 30, sometimes 40, but nobody who tried to leave Millbrook had ever made it more than 52 miles. And every single time someone tried, something catastrophic happened. Not all of them failed. Some escaped, but when they did, their lives fell apart. According to the articles, Eleanor Hartwick had made it to Philadelphia after her stroke. Her daughter, who had driven her, had been in a car accident 2 weeks later. Her husband had lost his job. Her house had burned down. The articles made vague references to a pattern of misfortune. None of them said what I was beginning to understand. The town did not like being abandoned. I checked the records further back. There were no such articles before 1985. It was as if something had changed that year. Something had shifted. Whatever curse or rule or law governed Millbrook had begun in 1985, and no record explained why. I spent 2 weeks in a state of creeping horror. I read every old newspaper I could find. I went to the town hall and looked through public records. I even broke into the basement of the oldest church, searching for something that might explain why this was happening, why people could not leave. why the town seemed to have some kind of horrible gravity that kept everyone trapped. I found nothing, but I felt watched the entire time. That was when the nightmares started. I would dream of being outside of the town, on the highway, driving away. And then I would look in my mirror and see the town behind me, getting closer instead of farther away. I would press the accelerator to the floor, and the car would slow down instead of speed up. Sometimes in these nightmares, I could see figures standing in the road ahead of me, their faces blank and empty. Sometimes I would feel a hand on my shoulder, and I would look over and see my mother sitting next to me, smiling, her skin cold and gray and raw. I would wake up gasping. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, stopped hiding from me. Instead, she started appearing. I would see her at the edge of my property, just standing there, watching my house. When I came outside to confront her, she would walk away without saying anything. But every night, I would hear her outside, walking, pacing, waiting. Other people joined her. I would see them in the street, sometimes in groups, sometimes alone. They would stare at my house. They would not move when I drove by. They would simply watch, with expressions of profound sadness and resignation. One night in July, I decided I was going to leave no matter what happened. I was going to drive and I was not going to stop. I was going to accept whatever consequence came, whatever accident or breakdown or catastrophe the town could muster. Because staying felt worse than any alternative. Staying felt like I was sinking into something that would eventually pull me under completely. I packed a bag. I put all of my documents in a folder. I got in my car at midnight and I drove. I made it 34 miles before the terrifying thing happened. The road ahead of me simply ended. There was no accident, no debris, no emergency. The asphalt simply stopped, and ahead of me was a wall of fog so complete and impenetrable that I could not see anything beyond it. I stopped the car and stared at it. The fog was gray and thick and wrong. It did not move like normal fog. It seemed deliberate. It seemed alive. I sat in that car for an hour, my headlights cutting into the fog but illuminating nothing. And then I heard a sound. It was distant at first, but it grew closer. It was the sound of footsteps. Hundreds of them, thousands of them. The sound of a vast crowd walking down the highway toward me, but I could see nothing. I turned my car around. I drove back to Millbrook as fast as I could. By the time I reached the town limits, my hands were bleeding from gripping the steering wheel so hard. I was crying. I was hyperventilating. And I understood, finally and completely, that I was not leaving. Not ever. The next morning, I went to Tom Hershey and I told him I needed help. I told him what I had learned about the articles, about the pattern, about the wall of fog. He did not seem surprised. He sat in his office for a long time, just looking at me, and then he told me that I needed to understand something important. He said that Millbrook had been a normal town. In 1985, a group of people had made a decision. They had performed something, a ritual, a ceremony, something that he would not fully explain to me. They had done it because they were desperate. The town was dying. Young people were leaving. Businesses were closing. The population was in free fall. They had made an offer to something in the mountains. Something that lived in the dark spaces between the trees. Something that existed in the fog and the earth and the ancient stone. They had offered it permanence. They had offered it worship. And in return, it had bound them all to the town. It had made Millbrook alive in a way that nothing else could. It had given them something like immortality. The people who had lived here in 1985 were still alive. They did not age. They did not get sick. They just existed, trapped, bound to the town like anchors, like sacrifices. And anyone who tried to leave would face the thing that lived in the fog. Hershey had been 53 in 1985. He was still 53. He had been trapped here for 40 years, and he would be trapped here forever. He asked me if I wanted to join the ritual. I asked him what happened if I refused. He did not answer, but the next week, I started to understand. My body stopped aging. I stopped needing to eat. I stopped needing to sleep, though I could not stop trying. At night, I would lie in my mother's bed and stare at the ceiling, waiting for the sun, never closing my eyes, never sleeping, waiting in the darkness. My skin became translucent. I could see the veins beneath it, and they were black. I started to understand that refusing was not actually an option. The thing in the mountains had already marked me. It had already claimed me the moment I decided to leave. The townspeople of Millbrook stopped pretending that I was living in my mother's house. They started appearing at night, standing outside my windows, their faces blank and patient and eternal. Mrs. Patterson came every evening at sunset and stood at the edge of my property. She never moved. She never blinked. She was waiting for me to understand. And I am understanding, slowly, what my future holds. This is not a story with a happy ending. This is a story about a mistake I made when I was vulnerable and broken and desperate for quiet. This is a warning about small towns that feel too peaceful, about roads that seem to have no exits, about the cost of permanence. I am still in Millbrook. I am writing this from my mother's house, and I am not sure how much longer I can continue to think like a human being. Every day, I feel the boundaries of myself becoming less distinct. I feel myself merging with the town, with the fog, with the ancient and hungry thing that lives in the mountains and feeds on human desire for safety. I do not know if this story will reach anyone. I do not know if anyone will believe it, but if you are driving through central Pennsylvania and you see a sign for Millbrook, do not stop. Do not enter. Drive past it as fast as you can. Do not take the exit. Do not let the quiet call to you, because the town is always looking for new anchors, new people to bind to it, new souls to feed to the thing in the fog. The town does not like being abandoned, and it will do absolutely anything to make sure that you never try to leave. Small towns are supposed to feel safe, but Pennsylvania has places where safety was replaced by silence. Subscribe to Vesper Shroud for more true horror stories, because some towns are still watching.